All right, so I think I want to start another one, and I don't know, I've had this one for a while. It's called Babylonian Influence on the Bible and Popular Beliefs, a comparative study of Genesis 1 and 2 by A. Smythe Palmer. Put it right up here so you can see this book. It's by Booktree. I like a lot of their books. Jason Bashir recommends a lot of their stuff, and I really respect Jason. So I always go there first and try to check out what I can. I always feel weird reading theirs too, because I don't ask permission. I just read. But I'm dealing with them. I'm a little bit more proper. So, anyways, still ain't gonna ask permission. But thought I would try a new one, and it'll probably be the same format, but I'm always working on new stuff. I can't help it. I like to tinker. So you're just going to have to bear with me. I'm thinking at the bottom, I really want to include footnotes. I don't know how to read footnotes while reading at the same time to have it be cohesive. So it's kind of tough. I don't like doing it. And there's so many in this book that I don't want to stop every page and read them. It just will cut from it. So the first couple of these, until I figure it out, and I may just say, fuck it, I ain't gonna do them, and that'll just be that, because I just don't know how. But I'll be working on it, because I like the subtitles. I don't like other things doing my subtitles, so that's why I put my subtitles on there. Sorry if you have to pause yours on YouTube or Rumble or whatever. I'm not concerned about that. But I will continue to put my subs on there. And I probably will put the footers down at the bottom, just giving you a little taste of what's coming. And I'll probably completely scrap that idea by the end and just muscle through the book. Who knows? But whatever. I just wanted to kind of give a little, what do you call that? Intro. So I'm going to read from the very beginning. I'm even going to read the introduction to this because, like I said, I respect Paul and everything he's doing, so I don't want to fuck him over too much. So, this book, 1897. Pretty old. I don't know much about it. Had never read it. I've heard it mentioned a few times. Thought it was time to give it a shot. I had a little bit of extra time. So, that's what I'm doing. And, so. Studies on biblical subjects. Number 1, Babylonian influence on the Bible and popular beliefs. Thehom and Tiamat, Hades and Satan. A comparative study of Genesis 1 and 2 by A. Smythe Palmer, Double D, author of A Misunderstood Miracle, Folk Etymology, The World Hunter's Notebook, etc. Vicar of Holy Trinity, Herman Hill, Wainstein, London, David Newt, 270-271, Strand, 1897. Introduction. Many scholars now know that the Bible creation stories had their origins in far older tales. These stories match the Old Testament stories almost identically and come from clay tablets discovered in ancient Samaria and Babylonia. These tablets use the oldest form of writing known on earth and are the oldest preserved stories the world has ever known. They were passed down over many centuries before being adopted by Moses or whoever wrote the Old Testament. A number of interesting concepts within these stories were carried over in the Bible from that time forward. For example, the Hebrews have a serpent who introduces mankind to sin and disobedience, which it quite likely the same dragon serpent in the Babylonian creation story that represents physical evil and chaos. The Babylonian home for the evil was in the deep, or the abyss, which later became transformed into Hades or hell. Palmer includes a great deal of information on the dragon, whose home was in the abyss in Babylonian literature. This dragon ultimately became the devil to later Christians. This is fascinating material, and the more one explores it, the more things add up and make sense. Palmer explores the Old Testament very carefully in this work, and the Babylonian parallels are amazing. This is a great companion book to the actual creation legends, available word for word in another set of books called Enuma Elish, also published by the Book Tree. With these books studied together, it becomes immensely clear that the Word of God may not have come in its entirety directly from God, but rather the gods. The implications on our religious beliefs and institutions would change drastically if enough people go back to the actual sources, the earliest known sources of our belief systems, and examine the evidence. A larger understanding is bound to result. That was the purpose of Palmer had in mind when putting this book together, and it is with that hope that we make it available. Paul Tice, the Book Tree. The picture that's in my background, snagged directly from this book. That's the conflict of Merodach, the god of light, with Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. See page 17 and 35 from the original in the British Museum. And I think I'm going to stop that one, but I won't stop for you guys. All right. Well, I've been messing with it about 4 hours, and I could not figure out for the life of me how to get these to work out and be symbiotic together with the subs and the footers and all that. So maybe by the time I get this out, it'll somehow work, but we'll see. Chapter 1, Babylonian influence on the Bible and popular beliefs. The higher criticism, whatever mistakes it may have made in details, has at least obtained this clear result that the human or subjective element in the Bible is now more fully recognized than heretofore. Inspiration has proved to be not so much the mechanical conveyance of new ideas and unknown facts to a passive automation whose business is to register the revelation as a certain divine influence which directs human researches and assimilates human modes of thought, freeing them from error, elevating them to a higher spiritual level, and utilizing them for the impartation of divine truth. First, that which is natural, then that which is spiritual. God's word to man, if it is to be intelligible, must come in terms of humanity. Speaking to Hebrews, he must clothe his revelation in such figures of speech and familiar modes of thought as would be level to the Hebrew understanding. And they, like every other people, had an historic evolution. They had their own limitations and superstitions, the inherited traditions and folk tales of a misty past which must inevitably have colored and reacted upon their religious beliefs. This we find to be the case. The forefather of the Jewish church, the first who bore the name of Hebrew, came out of Haran and Ur of the Chaldees, two strongholds of the ancient Babylonian faith. Up to a certain age, while he dwelt on the other side of the Euphrates, Abraham worshipped the gods of Babylonia, and his fathers had done as his fathers had done before him. Joshua 24:2. And he never quite divested himself of the ideas in which he had been brought up, with which his mind had been tinged from infancy. He could not fail to be familiar with the stories of creation, of paradise, and of the deluge, which were widely current amongst the Babylonians. Al-Kindi, writing about the year 830 A.D., mentions a Muslim tradition that Abraham lived with his people 80 years and 10 in the land of Haran, worshipping none other than Al-Uzza, an idol famous in that land and adored by the men of Haran under the name of the moon, i.e. Sin, which same custom prevails among them to the present day. The language spoken by Abraham was that of his father, Terah, the Babylonian or Assyrian, which was near akin to the Canaanitish and Hebrew tongue. Therefore, when he migrated into the land of Canaan, he did not find himself altogether among strangers. He met there a people already imbued with a certain amount of Babylonian culture and literature, as the Tel El Amaran tablets indicate, and acquainted with the same gods, Nebo, Sin, Rimmon, Moloch, Anath, and Ishtar, to which his fathers and himself had once been devoted. The worship of some of these deities lingered even among the Israelites, we are told, down to the time of Joshua, Joshua 24:14. Thus, through contact with With the early inhabitants of Palestine, the Hebrews would meet anew with the religious beliefs and traditions of their Babylonian forefathers. At a later period, their Samaritan neighbors, who were essentially Assyrians, would no doubt have indirect influence in a similar direction, and their 70 years' captivity in the cradle land of their race could not fail to revive the fading impressions of its childhood. At all events, Moses, or the compiler of the book of Genesis, whoever he may have been, manifests a familiar acquaintance with the religious epics of Babylonia, which go back to the 23rd century BC to a date, i.e., about 800 years earlier than the reputed time of Moses. By being worked into these early Hebrew documents, Babylonian ideas were ensured persistence and obtained a worldwide currency. Some of these interesting survivals we propose to examine and trace their origin in the present essay. The first to which we will direct our attention is the evolution in Jewish thought of the spirit of evil. Very little concerning Satan, the enemy, is revealed in the Old Testament scriptures. In only 4 distinct passages is he explicitly mentioned. Whatever conceptions, therefore, the Jews formed about his nature and character did not come so much from direct revelation as from the traditional ideas which they had inherited from their original home in the valley of the Euphrates. The existence of this mysterious being, it need hardly be said, is a distinct question which does not occupy us here. Hold on. Yeah, I think I got to stop there. All right, this looks like actual chapter 1. Chapter 1, Tehom and Tiamat. We will begin by concentrating our attention on the second verse of the first chapter of Genesis, which says, "The earth was waste and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." The last word here is one with a history which has played an important part in the development of religious thought. It stands out like an Eocene boulder amid a stratum of a later and different formation, a veritable survival from prehistoric antiquity. The word in the original is Tehom, which is understood by herbalists, Hebraists, to be a derivative from whom, to roar or rage, and so of onomatopoeic origin, indicating the roaring of the deep-mouthed sea, just as Dryden speaks of the homing sea, and Milton of the humming tide. Tehom then denotes the raging water of the dark, chaotic deep, which held undisputed sway over the yet unformed earth. The vast, immeasurable abyss, outrageous as a sea, dark, wasteful, wild, upon from the bottom, turned by furious winds and surging waves as mountains to assault heaven's height, and with the center mixed the pole. It is to be noticed that in the Hebrew, Tehom is construed without the article, which would seem to imply that it is an old traditional name for that which had partly been personified and mythologized, as if in English, instead of writing the deep, we gave the word a capital. Darkness was upon the face of deep, or chaos, and this personification at an earlier stage had really been made. The Hebrew cosmology contains, beyond question, some mythic elements of a very archaic type, of which one of the most notable here presents itself. These elements, it is admitted on all sides, are of Babylonian origin. The ancient legends of the creation, which were current in Mesopotamia before the dawn of history, were assimilated by the inspired writer, but in such a manner that the mythological and polytheistic element in them was carefully discarded, and a purely monotheistic element substituted in its place. In this particular instance, the Semitic Tehom, deep, of Genesis accurately corresponds to the synonymous Assyrian word Tiamat, frequently met with on the cuneiform tablets and monuments. Tiamat was the great watery abyss which was the ultimate source of all created things. as the fourth tablet of the creation story expresses it. The expression, no, that's part of the footers. I think. Can't tell. The creation story expresses it. The primeval deep was their generator. Mumu Tiamat, Chaos Deep, was the mother of them all. This watery waste, Tiamat, which at first covered the earth, afterwards came to be conceived as the ocean stream that encircled it, which led to further developments. It contained within it the germs of the whole universe. The earth was formed, but in the womb as yet of waters, embryon, immature, involved, appeared not over all the face of earth. Main ocean flowed, not idle. In the South Babylonia, this matter, uniformed and void, was known under the name Bahu, the great mother, the generatress of mankind. Bahu, the deep of chaos, where the seven evil spirits or storm demons have their home, is evidently only another aspect of Tiamat. It is the original of the Hebrew Bahu, which in the verse of Genesis we are considering appears in the formula Tahu Va Bahu, waste and desolation. In the Phoenician cosmology, it appears as Bahu, Baau, the mother of the first man. In these ancient cosmologies, Tiamat or Bahu, the watery abyss, was the primal source of the universe. This chaos was the first thing that existed, and out of it earth and sky were formed. To symbolize the fact, huge brazen lavers termed abysses, Apsu, were ritually employed in Babylonian temples, and even in Solomon's temple, the sea, which he made of molten metal, had the same meaning. Here also is evidently the origin of the Bothos, or unfathomable deep, which the Gnostic Valentinus held to be the self-existent first principle, from which all the aeons of his system emanated. Yeah, it's rough. It'll be rough for a minute, figuring it out. All right. Chapter 2, the account of the creation. In Genesis, no account is given of the absolute creation of the world, but only of the formation of the cosmos, the established order of nature as it now exists. In verses 1 and 2, we find a primordial matter or stuff already in existence as presupposed fact. The Spirit of God, or possibly the wind of God, or a potent wind. The word for spirit and wind being the same in Hebrew is represented as hovering with a gentle bird-like motion over the dark surging waters of Tehom, the primal flood, and under its fostering influence the work of creation goes forward peacefully and harmoniously. As Milton paraphrases it with sufficient accuracy, his brooding wings, the Spirit of God outspread and vital virtue infused and vital warmth throughout the fluid mass. Professor Teal observes that the Egyptians regarded 4 pairs of cosmic powers as taking part in the work of creation in a manner closely analogous to the Semitic representation. In endless duration, Heh and Het equals Asir Rishtu. In Hebrew, it looks like Rish Eth. Now, here, hold on. Told you people, I gotta figure this out. I think that's it. With darkness, Kek or Kekt, on the abyss, Nun and Nunt equals Tehom, and the waters of this primeval ocean were moved by the wind, Neni and Ninit, the breath of the deity. The Babylonian account of creation, however, was conceived in a very different spirit. Here, Tiamat, the dark aboriginal chaos, is regarded as no part of the divine creation, but as a self-determining brutal power disowning the authority of Anu, the god of heaven. The process of reducing this elemental savage into law and order takes the form of a violent struggle or conflict between Merodach, the creator and mediator, the son of Anu, the god of the good or refreshing wind. deputed for this purpose, and Tiamat depicted as a resisting and antagonistic monster. Creation is the subjugation of this unreclaimed brute force, and the instruments with which Merodach arms himself for the encounter are the winds. Ugh. All right, Chapter 3, The Primeval Chaos. We have seen that the notion of the chaos of darkness and disorder coming as such from the hands of the heavenly creator found no acceptance with the Babylonian cosmographer. It could not be but a difficulty to a thoughtful mind if we hold that the material substratum of the cosmos was created in the first instance, a confused and formless conglomerate, a tahu vobu, i.e. a desolate and unorganized mass. We have to suppose that this imperfect creation was a rude and tentative beginning, a preparatory and provisional means to a subsequent end. This seems so unlikely in itself and so little consonant with the divine way of working, for God is not the author of confusion, 1 Corinthians 14:33, that many have sought to escape from the difficulty by regarding the detailed account given in the first of Genesis as not that of the original creation, but rather that of the recreation or reconstruction of a material world already existent and already, for some explained reason, brought to confusion. The prophet Isaiah states explicably, that God created not the earth or a tahu or desolation. That looks like 55:18, or is that 45:18? I think that's 45:18. And in this view, there is nothing contradictory when Genesis says, as it apparently does, that the earth which God had created in the beginning, 5:1, had become desolation and emptiness, 5:2. How, then, did the earth come to have fallen from its original state, which we may be sure was good, into the chaotic condition represented in the opening verses of Genesis? Kurtz and others have conjectured with much reason that between the first and second verses must be read in the fall of Satan and his rebel angels, and that some such catastrophe appears to be hinted by the words employed. As a defective creation is hardly conceivable, there must have been some hostile power at work which had introduced ruin and desolation into what had originally been the perfect handiwork of the Almighty. Inasmuch then as the words tahu vobu, when used in other passages of Scripture, imply not mere negative imperfection, but actual. I skipped some italics or some parentheses because sometimes I just don't know. I'll go back. Example: Isaiah 24:11, Jeremiah 4:23 imply not mere negative imperfection, but actual laying waste and positive desolation. So it is thought they must denote here traces of wreck and ruin which had been wrought in the earth by the overthrow of its original denizens, the angels who, by rebelling against God, kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, Jude 6, 2 Peter 2:4, and were cast down into the abyss. That old first darkness of which Moses speaks in the second verse of Scripture says, steer, God, the Father of lights and of light, did not create. He could never have said, let there be darkness. Darkness is the product and witness of the first apostasy in the light heaven of the first creation. Through sin, the below and the abyss, i.e. Tiamat, have come into being. To the same purport, Baumgarten, the apostasy of the spirits to whom the earth was given at the beginning, had its consequence in the devastation, the darkening, the dominion of the roaring abyss, i.e. Tiamat, on the earth as the territory and sphere appointed for these spirits. Accordingly, the Mosaic account of the 6 days' creation would really have to do with the reconstruction of the marred and disorganized earth, with the Creator reduced to order after the banishment of the fallen angels. With this may be compared the Babylonian legend of the revolt of a portion of the heavenly host. In the fourth book of the creation epic, Bel Merodach challenges Tiamat with the words, "Trouble on high, thou hast excited." Sayce, Higher Criticism 67. They also had arrived at the opinion held by many commentators that it was in order to restore the disturbed harmony of the universe and to fill up the gap left by the defection of the rebel angels that mankind were created, a better race to bring into their vacant room. One of the creation tablets says that Merodach, the creator, caused the yoke to be laid on the gods, angels who were his enemies, and on account of their sin created mankind, or as M. Operate translates it, to form a counterpoise to them, the God of life created mankind. The Revolt in Heaven tablet has been translated as follows. To those rebel angels, gods, he prohibited return. He stopped their service. He removed them unto the gods, who were his enemies. In their room he created mankind. The first who received life dwelt with him. He may give them strength never to neglect his word, according to the voice of the serpent whom his hands had made. All right, chapter 4, conflict between Tiamat and Merodach. From what has been said, we can see that Tiamat, the chaos of the great deep, came to be regarded as the manifestation of enmity to heaven and its ruler, and even itself a hostile and resisting power, which the good creator had to subdue and force into submission. Tiamat accordingly was personified as a hideous female monster attended by a brood of evil and mishapen creatures. She is the great dragon of darkness with which the god of light, Merodach, engages in deadly conflict. Inasmuch then as Tiamat is the ideal representative of all disorder, anarchy, and chaos, to counteract and vanquish her is to bring order out of confusion, to adduce the beautiful cosmos and the regular course of nature out of a rudis indistic moles. It is, in the words of Carlyle, a mighty conquest over chaos. Thus, to the poetical mind of the Babylonian, the divine work of creation appeared as a noble victory gained by the good spirit over brute matter, by light over the power of darkness, and he depicted it first mentally and then on his monuments as a terrific struggle between the kindly sun god and the dragon of disorder. Merodach, the benign deity who is the special mediator and benefactor of mankind, is appointed by Anu, the supreme god, as champion of the heavenly powers to do battle with the evil monster. Long and terrible was the conflict that ensued. Tiamat, as a rampant dragon, lifted herself up with extended wings and tore at her opponent with tooth and claw, her jaws gaping wide as if to swallow him. But Merodach, raising on high the thunderbolts with which he was armed, thrust a storm wind down her throat, which caused the monster to burst in sunder. And then the demons which were with her fled in dismay from before the victorious god. A very graphic description of this duel, in which the celestial champion overthrew the scaly Tiamat, is given on one of the Assyrian tablets, of which a rendering by Reverend C.J. Ball here follows in a condensed form. Speaking of Merodach, it says, "A weapon his right hand he made grasp, he shot lightning with his countenance. He made a net to throw round the monster Tiamat. The four winds he seized, he created a storm wind, a baleful wind, a hurricane, a whirlwind. The monster Tiamat, coiling herself, cometh after him. The Lord also raised the flood, his mighty weapon, that chariot which leveleth all enemies he rode. Then Tiamat assailed the prince of the gods. Merodach, in battle she came on, she closed in conflict. The Lord also spread his net, he threw it around her. A storm wind taking the rear before him, he let loose. Tiamat opened her mouth to draw it in, the storm wind she received within her, so that she could not close her lips. She was pierced through the heart, and her mouth she opened wide. He bound her, and her life he swallowed up. Her carcass he cast down, upon her he stood. When Tiamat the leader had vanquished her might, he broke, her army was routed, and the gods, her helpers marching beside her, wheeled round and terrified turned their back, and their weapons he brake in pieces. In this stirring narrative, Merodach is seen letting loose the winds to conquer Tiamat, just as in Genesis, a wind from Elohim passes over the face of Tehom to make it amenable to his wishes. No form was too hideous to be given to that turbulent monster. An Assyrian bas relief representing this fierce encounter is in the British Museum, and the subject is often repeated on Babylonian cylinders. The demon is depicted with huge talons like a bird of prey, with fanged jaws and extended wings, with horns upon her head and a stumpy tail. She retreats fighting before the onslaught of Merodach, the god of light, who presses her close with uplifted thunderbolts. This Babylonian conception of the power of evil, as we shall presently see, passed into all lands. On the ancient Persian bas reliefs, the evil spirit over which the king is combating victorious is invariably represented as a winged monster, which bears an indubitable resemblance to the Chaldean Tiamat. See the figures in Perot and Chapaz art in Persia, page 145, 148, 322, 428, 455, and 465. Indeed, these grotesque monsters, wherein the shapes of birds and beasts of prey are united and fused together, to which the Greeks gave the name the Gryphes or griffins, are found everywhere in Egypt and Phoenicia and Asia Minor, as well as in Mesopotamia. Very probably of the same brood is the four-legged winged monster by which Oceanus is born in the Prometheus Vindictus of Achelous. But a more obvious survival of Tiamat on Greek soil is presented in Thamus, who was fabled to have sprung from the union of Pontus, sea, and Ge, earth, and became the father of the monstrous bird-formed harpies, whirlwinds, and iris, rainbow. It is not difficult to see what was the natural phenomenon which served as the groundwork of this earliest conception of the creation. When the glorious sun rose out of the cold, dark waters of the sea, dispelling the gloom and mists of night in which the earth had been wrapped, while silence brooded over it, and all things were hushed as nature's self lay dead, as he mounted the sky, bringing life in his genial warmth, and, as it were, calling back into being all that had been buried in formless obscurity during the chill hours of darkness. It seemed to primitive man hardly less than an actual creation going on before his eyes. It was the daily restoration of a dead world. The mythologizing faculty everywhere regarded the rising sun going forth to his daily conflict and victory as a warrior god whose spear and arrows were the bright rays which he scattered around him, while the dark water over which he had mounted triumphant and the clouds of night which he put to flight were the vanquished monsters which he destroyed, either the devouring serpent of the deep or the flying dragons of the air. Even a modern divine, in a sermon at Westminster, fell naturally into the same mode of expression when he spoke of darkness still struggling with light, yet ever receding, retreating step by step, and piercing through and through as it retreats by the glittering shafts of the true King of Day. And Shakespeare, with the primitive instinct, says, Him let us... Wait, is this... hold on here. Hold on. Let's make sure I'm reading the right thing. There it is. Shakespeare, with the primitive instinct, says, Night's swift dragons cut the clouds full fast, and yonder shines Aurora's harbinger. Swift, swift, you dragons of the night, that dawning may bear the raven's eye. So to the ancient Egyptians, the sun god Ra, the creator, the cause of all life on earth, rose in his brightness out of the gloomy depths of the great water Nu, the primeval matter from which all things sprung, in which lay bound the chains the serpent Refreth, the symbol of evil, otherwise called Apap, the dragon foe. The deep seemed to gain the victory when it swallowed him up, as Osiris in the darkening west set. But he is always triumphant in the morning when he comes forth as Horus or Unnefer, the glorious riser. Then Ra pierces with his weapons the serpent of darkness, Apap, or as Horus spears the crocodile of the watery Hades, as Kefpera, another name of the rising sun. He is the type of matter passing into life and the quickening of the dead. To him all animal and vegetable life is due. Thus, the hand-to-hand encounter of the Babylonian powers of light and darkness, Merodach and Tiamat, is the prototype and forerunner of a long series of similar conflicts in various mythologies. Those, example between Thratonia and the dragon Dahaka, between Mithra and Ahriman, Zeus and Typhon, Apollo and Python, Perseus and Gorgo, Sigurd and Fafnir, Beowulf and Grendel, St. George and the dragon. The Vedas present a striking analogy in the deadly combat between Indra, the Aryan war god, assisted by the Maruts or storm winds, and the serpent Ahi or Vritra, the power of darkness, whom the god destroys with the thunderbolts. So in Egypt, Osiris, the sun god, contends with Apap, the Egyptian Satan. And so in the New World, Mikabo, the god of light, pierces with his dart the prince of serpents, who lives in a lake and floods the earth with its waters. In most mythologies, dragons are popular personifications of awe-inspiring meteorological phenomena such as darkness, the storm cloud, the waterspout, the torrent, or flood. That's it. All right, chapter 5. The serpent. The dragon Tiamat readily came to be confused and identified with an independent conception, the serpent of darkness, which was itself the offspring of the great deep and an enemy of the heavenly powers. The dragon of chaos, according to the tablets, was banished to the depths of the underworld, and sometimes the monster is described as having the body of a woman terminating in the coiled tails of two serpents, and by a natural transition was merged sometimes in the evil serpent, the monstrous serpent of the sea, the serpent of darkness, which is coiled around the earth. We have here a glimmering of the reason why the evil spirit was conceived by the writer of Genesis as wearing the form of a serpent. He introduces him without explanation with a prefixed article, the serpent, as one already well known in the current beliefs of his people. This abrupt entrance of the serpent upon the scene, as Baumgarten remarks, seems to imply that he had stood in some relation to the earth previous to the 6 days' creation. Of this relation, he says, I find a trace of Genesis 1:2, where the earth is described as a territory of darkness, of emptiness, and of the roaring deep. In such a condition of the earth, I cannot by any means recognize the beginning of the ways and works of God. In other words, in Tiamat, the destructive power of evil was already manifest. Its invisible incarnation was the dragon or serpent. And we can trace, as Professor Sayce has suggested in the Babylonian story, the reason why the reptile was esteemed more subtle than any other beast of the field, because it is associated with the sea god Ea. Now, Ea was not only the god of waters, but the god of wisdom. He had his dwelling in Absu, which denoted both the abyss or deep and the sea of knowledge. Depth and profundity have ever been synonymous with wisdom. The primeval Absu in Akkadian belief is situated at the head of the Persian Gulf and at the mouth of the Euphrates because there was, for them, the entrance to the deep or ocean stream, the ever-sounding and mysterious sea. There lay Eridu, the good city, the original of the Eden of Genesis. There all worship and culture took its beginning. And just as the natives of our own northern isles, looking out over the dim mystic sea, imagined that they saw the immense sea snake, the kraken, which dwells below the thunders of the upper deep, far, far beneath in the abysmal sea, sometimes arising out of its depths, or else a water fay, which, mingling her voice with the sighing breeze, was often heard to sing of subterranean wonders or to chant prophecies of future events. So the voice which was borne to the Babylonians from the deep seemed full of mystery, and its god, they thought, must be a god of knowledge. The watery abyss, Tiamat in its primitive sense, was thus the home and the visible embodiment of Ea, and he was regarded as being at once the god of waters, the god of wisdom, and the god of the infernal region. He was the lord of the deep, which, like the Okeanos of Homer, was supposed as a flowing stream to surround the earth in a serpentine coil. This binding and encircling stream was called sometimes the rope of the universe. More often, it was compared to a huge snake or serpent. Then, by a natural transition, Ea himself came to be symbolized as a serpent and was styled god of the river of the great snake. This primeval sea serpent is evidently identical with Tiamat, the dragon of the great deep. One old Akkadian hymn, for instance, speaks of the strong serpent of the sea, which sweeps away the foe, another of the sea monsters of chaos. And as this serpent is closely connected with the god of wisdom, we discern the reason without difficulty why it is described in Genesis as the subtlest of created things. The Assyrian serpent of darkness continued in Semitic belief to be the incarnation of guile and wickedness and became an apt emblem of the evil principle. We have seen, moreover, that this cosmic serpent of the deep was originally one with Tiamat, the dragon leader of the powers of night and chaos. Indeed, some cylinders depict Tiamat in the form of a huge serpent when assailed in the creation conflict by Merodach. The Babylonians believed the serpent as a beast coming out of the abyss to be a demonical being, as the Arabs still call a serpent a jinn, and give it also the name of Tiamat and sometimes Abu, the enemy, which in Hebrew is the meaning of Satan. And the two conceptions are fundamentally and originally one. When St. John says in the Apocalypse 11:9, the great dragon was cast down, the old serpent, he that is called the devil and Satan. There is a manifest reference to the opening chapters of Genesis and the ancient cosmogonic idea that underlies them. By the dragon in that passage is denoted a sea monster, the Tannin, so often referred to in the Old Testament as potentate of the sea and of the dark mystic world which hides the secrets of the hoary deep. Milton, with the divining instinct of the poet, reverts to the primeval type when he represents Satan. With the head uplift above the water, his other parts besides, prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating many a rood in bulk as huge as that sea beast, Leviathan, which God of all his works created huges that swim the ocean stream. We can trace how this curious evolution came about by the help of the Babylonian religion. Tiamat, the raging world of waters, is there the ideal of anarchy and confusion. A dark, illimitable ocean without bound, without dimension, where length, breadth, and height, and time and place are lost, where eldest night and chaos, ancestors of nature, hold eternal anarchy amidst the noise of endless wars and by confusion stand. This wild abyss, the womb of nature and perhaps her grave, of neither sea nor shore nor air nor fire, but all these in their pregnant causes mixed, confusedly, in which thus might ever fight. What wonder that this turbulent discord came to be personified as the evil one by bad preeminence and the enemy of the gods. It was made to stand not only for chaos, which was a somewhat similar personification among the Greeks, Hesiod, Theogony 116, of aboriginal confusion as a gaping, open-mouthed monster, but for all the evils and disorders that proceeded out of chaos. In particular, it was the death-bringing serpent that first beguiled men and tempted them to sin. Thus, Tiamat the deep, the source of physical evil, passed by a natural transition into the demon of moral evil. And in the same way, the process of creation, conceived as a primeval conflict between Merodach and Tiamat, or Bel and the dragon, i.e., between order and anarchy, the life-giving spirit and dead matter, developed into a moral dualism between light and darkness, right and wrong, God and Satan. To the ancient Babylonians, the origin of evil was the loud misrule of chaos, out of which this beautiful world of order was drawn by the superior might of the Creator. And so Tiamat, at first the personification of anarchy, became the ideal antipathy of all that is good and fair, and eventually the leader of the powers of darkness, the evil spirit. In one incantation, example, a Babylonian beseeches his god to destroy Tiamat, strike the unpitying evil one. It was an old Akkadian belief that the human race, originally innocent, was seduced by the temptations of the dragon of the deep, just as in the sacred books of the Parissus, the fiendish serpent, as agent of Agra Manu, Ahriman, the evil principle, strives to destroy or mar the world of the good Creator. This dragon, or misshapen body and malignant disposition, the enemy of all righteousness, was the prototype of the Hebrew Satan. The Babylonian devil, says Dr. Budge, is not much to be distinguished from the Satan we read of in the Bible. It is difficult, says Professor Sayce, not to trace in the lineaments of Tiamat the earliest portraiture of the medieval devil. When the Semitic faith existed in its full purity, Satan, the adversary, was but an angel and minister of the Lord, and the supreme God was the creator alike of good and evil, of light and darkness. The empire of chaos was really a stranger to genuine Semitic belief. It was a legacy left by the Akkadians, which was assimilated and adapted by the Semites as best they could. Tiamat, the aboriginal deep, is often referred to as the mother of a brood of composite monsters, half beast, half bird, the rudimentary creatures of a previous eon corresponding to the saurians and amphibious reptiles of an extinct world. Warriors with the bodies of birds of the desert, men with the faces of ravens, Tiamat gave them suck, says an Akkadian tablet. These two were routed by the sun god Merodach. The disappearance of these dragons of the prime that tar each other in their slime was a part of the victory of light over darkness, of the heavenly powers over the titanic monsters of chaos. The German theologian Lang, though necessarily unacquainted with the late Babylonian discoveries, came to the conclusion on the grounds that Satan was originally the chief and center of the primeval world, in which colossal serpents, lizards, and other monstrous amphibia predominated. And for this reason, he thinks after its destruction he was designated as the dragon. He is a survival, the ethical giant fossil from the age of the pre-human Earth formation. But though that demon Earth has been judged and set aside by the formation of the human Earth, yet is smothered chaos, it has in various ways an influence on the tone of the present world's history. From time to time, the tones of the insular antiquity break forth. The billows, Tiamat again, roar and mingle sea and land, and masmata are exhaled from the swamps. Berosus, in his later account, says that in the primeval darkness, the abyss of waters, there existed monstrous animals of composite form, presided over by Tiamat, Tamati or Tiamat, which being unable to bear the light of the sun, were exterminated by Bel Merodach. A reminiscence of these creatures, he adds, survived in the winged bulls and cherubic figures of the monuments and in idols like Dagon of different animal forms combined. These monsters, it seems, in the new creation were banished to the depths of ocean, the dominion of Tiamat, where in Bible times they still existed, in opposition, however, to the Babylonian belief. These Tenenem, or sea monsters, are expressively claimed by the author of Genesis as a part of Jehovah's creation. Elohim created the great sea monsters. Their nursing mother, Tiamat, which is only obscurely referred to there in the mention of Tehom, as if purposely kept in the background, came into greater prominence at a later period when more familiarity with Babylonian ideas prevailed among the Jews. In the apocryphal book of Bel and the Dragon, we recognize Tiamat at once in the dragon of Babylon, with which Daniel had so curious an encounter. In that same place there was a great dragon which they of Babylon worshipped. Daniel, refusing to join in its worship, undertakes to slay it without sword or staff. He achieves his object by taking pitch, fat, and hair, which he did seethe together and make lumps thereof. This he put in the dragon's mouth, and so the dragon burst in sunder. And Daniel said, Lo, these are the gods ye worship. Not only is this serpent god of the Babylonians an undoubted survival of ancient Tiamat, but in Daniel's mode of destroying it by thrusting combustibles down its open throat, there is an evident remnants of Merodach's, Bel's, treatment of his draconic antagonist when he burst her open by forcing storm and thunderbolts through her gaping jaws. This apocryphal story, as Mr. Ball observes, existed in Aramaic and Hebrew at a very early date. It may have been evolved, he suggests, out of the words of Jeremiah. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon, he hath filled his belly, spoken originally of the king of Babylon. Both passages, however, are ultimately founded on the old legend of Merodach and Tiamat, with which the Jews became acquainted at Babylon, as the Talmud shows. We can see also that in the canonical book of Daniel, the imagery of the vision in the 7th chapter was suggested by Babylonian types. When the prophet saw the 4 winds breaking forth upon the great sea, and there coming forth from it 4 great beasts, one like a lion with an eagle's wings, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a fowl. In the Greek addition to the book of Esther, called the Dream of Mordecai, Haman, as the typical enemy of the Jews, is represented as a dragon engaged in mortal conflict with Mordecai as the champion of the righteous people, whose name is only a Hebraized form of Merodach, the light god. But though an aberration from the primitive story, the latter also takes the form of a dragon, or perhaps of one of the winged devas of the Persians. Some echoes of the original are perceivable in the circumstance that Merodach's victory is declared to be the victory of light and the sunrise on a day of darkness and obscurity, while a great flood, even much water, is an incident of the struggle. There was light and the sun and much water. It is the war of the religion of Israel against the religion of heathenism, elsewhere exhibited in Michael, withstanding the prince of the kingdom of Persia. The passage is as follows. Behold, 2 great dragons came forth, ready to fight, and their cry was great, and at their cry all nations were prepared to battle, that they might fight against the righteous people. And lo, a day of darkness and obscurity, tribulation and anguish, affliction and great uproar upon earth. Upon their cry, as it were from a little fountain, was made a great flood, even much water. The light and the sun rose up, and the lowly were exalted and devoured the glorious. All right, chapter 6, Dragons of the Bible. If Tiamat lurks perdu in the Hebrew conception of the great deep of Genesis 1-2, we might fairly expect that it would sometimes emerge into consciousness in the later literature of that people. And so we find it does. It is an interesting study to trace the survival of this semi-mythological personification of the deep as a dragon in the various books of the Bible. Its curious persistence proves how strong an impression the Babylonian legend had made on the Hebrew mind. Professor Gunkel has drawn attention to the subject in a very ingenious and suggestive book, and Professor Shen has given a general acceptance to his conclusions. Let us glance at some of the references which they supply. In Ezekiel, Pharaoh is compared to the great dragon, Tannim, that leath in the midst of his rivers. And again, thou art as a dragon in the seas. Isaiah says, in that day, Jehovah will punish Leviathan, the winding serpent, and he shall slay the dragon, Tannin, that is in the sea. And similarly, the psalmist, thou breakest the heads of the dragons, Tannimin, the sea monsters, in the waters. This sea dragon is frequently referred to under the title of Rahab, the violent, or the raging one, and always with something of the same mythological significance. It is the Assyrian Rahabu, a sea monster, and sometimes it is identified with the crocodile of Egypt. Thus, Job says, he stirreth up the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through Rahab, the dragon. His hand hath pierced the gliding serpent. And again, the helpers of Rahab, the rebellious sea monster, stoop under him, with which we may compare a difficult passage in the Psalms. Blessed is the man that looketh not to the Rahabim, and to lying apostates. In Isaiah we find Rahab, Tannin, and Tihom brought together in one verse. Art thou not it that cut Rahab in pieces, that pierced the dragon, Tannin? Art not thou in which dried up the waters of the great deep, Tihom? A passage earlier than these in the prophecy of Amos makes mention of a huge serpent at the bottom of the sea, ready to devour God's enemies. Though they hid themselves from my sight in the bottom of the sea, thence will I command the serpent, and he shall bite them. It is a widespread belief. The Muslims have a tradition that the tannin or waterspout lives in the depths of the sea, from which it comes up at times in the form of a black serpent. Robertson Smith holds that the Leviathan, the twisting monster, was likewise a personification of the waterspout. Behemoth, as well as Rahab and Leviathan, is probably only another phase of the same monster of the deep, the chaos dragon, which the Creator subdued in the world's infancy and banished to the profundity of the ocean. It is difficult not to see here also the germ of the sea serpent legend, which has exhibited such wonderful vitality till this day. Whether the Chinese dragon Lung, that which ascends, is also a descendant of Tiamat is more doubtful, though the prehistoric connection between the Chinese and the Akkadians, which M. Della Coperi and Mr. Ball have traced, at least renders it possible. Hiding in the depths all the winter, it mounts into the sky at the vernal equinox, and from the radical idea of rising which belongs to it, and so of loftiness and preeminence, it has become the well-known symbol of imperial power, which plays such an important part in Chinese ceremonial. Okay, chapter 7. The sea, a rebellious power. Though the Hebrews probably did not always remember that the monstrous Tiamat, Tihom, was itself nothing else but the dangerous primeval flood which Jehovah had to subjugate and set limits to before the orderly work of creation could proceed, Still down to the latest times, they retained a conscious feeling that this vanquished deep was a hostile and refractory power which was held in constant restraint by the might of the omnipotent, and needed to be watched continually lest it should break out in rebellion and bring back the primeval chaos. Chaos in numerous, no, yeah, in numerous avidium confudere mundus. This is the meaning of Job's complaint. Am I a sea yam or a sea monster, Tannin, that thou settest a watch over me? Where the reference in yam is to the heaven assaulting sea, the tumultuous primitive abyss which God watched and confined and still watches and enchains, lest it overwhelm the world, and in Tannin to those vast creatures with which the early waters of creation teemed. Similarly, in the other passages, who shut up the sea with doors, asked Jehovah, when I prescribed for it my decree and set bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Again, thou hast set them a bound that they must not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. With this should be compared an ancient Babylonian tablet which says of the conqueror of Tiamat, i.e. the creator, Merodach, a wide space on the face of the deep bound round, he made dust and poured it on the space. The Lord Merodach around the sea made an embankment, and the swords of Solomon in the 8th chapter of Proverbs, before the hills were brought forth, or the highest part of the dust of the world, when he sat a circle upon the face of the depth, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the sea his decree that the waters should not pass his commandment. Passages like these imply that the sea, like a wicked rebel, if Jehovah were to remove his curbing hand, would soon overflow the earth again and bring back the confusion of chaos, Tiamat. The subjugation of this turbulent creature is frequently appealed to as a proof of his divine omnipotence, and determination to punish every other hostile and resisting power. Thus, in Jeremiah, God demands of his revolting people, will ye not tremble at my presence, which have placed the sand for the bound of the sea by a perpetual decree that it cannot pass it? Although the waves thereof toss themselves, yet they cannot prevail. Though they roar, yet they cannot pass over it. The raging deep is here the symbol of impotent hostility, and in the apocalyptic books it is out of it that the monstrous powers of Antichrist are seen to arise. In the book of Jonah, the sea appears as an angry being only to be appeased by the surrender of a victim. The engulfing sea monster is only a more concrete form of the same conception, and on early Christian monuments it is often depicted as a dragon. The superstitious dread of the dangerous primeval ocean embodied in the Babylonian Tiamat, which with claw and fangs to typify its cruel savage nature and wings to indicate its mounting impetuosity, survived among the Semites in a fear and awe of the sea down to the latest times. As the great green one was at all times an object of dread to the ancient Egyptians as to the ancient Greek. There was nothing more evil than the sea to confound even the strongest man, so the Hebrews could never conquer a secret horror of that element, whose unfathomed depths for them reached down to the very gates of the lower world. Among most primitive people's dislike and fear are the sentiments inspired by the boundless insatiable ocean, which ravages against its bounds like a beast of prey. In Aryan tongues, its synonyms are the desert and night. It produces an impression of immensity, infinity, formlessness, and barren changeableness, well suited to a notion of chaos. The awful, pitiless sea, with all its terror and mystery, the dim, dark sea, so like unto death, that divides and yet unites mankind. Spencer also has expressed this ancient feeling of repugnance to the sea as a source of mysterious danger. So to the sea we came, the sea that is a world of waters heaped up on high, rolling like mountains in wide wilderness, horrible, hideous, roaring with hoarse cry, and is the sea, quoteth Corydon, so fearful. Fearful much more, quoteth he, than heart can fear, thousand wild beasts with deep mouths gaping direful, therein still wait poor passengers to tear, whose life doth loathe and longs death to behold, before he die already dead with fear, and yet would have with heart half stony cold. Let him to see, and he shall see it there. Wordsworth, sharing the same feeling, could not see a ship put forth to sea without experiencing of the old sea some reverential fear. The ancient awe noticed by Wordsworth for the sea and its tremendous secrets, as De Quincey truly observes, is a feeling that has not nor ever will become entirely obsolete. No excess of nautical skill will ever perfectly disenchant the great abyss from its terrors. We are not surprised, therefore, to find that in the Hebrew scriptures this element is a frequent metaphor not only for dreary confusion and peril, but for misery and calamity. As representing the original chaotic water, it is a manifestation of the destructive energies of evil upon earth. Reduced to order and confined, it had received a place among the good works of God, and its embankment was nothing less than a victory over a bad, revolting power. But the waters of the sea are a surviving remnant of that raging abyss, Tiamat, which in the beginning made earth a desolation, Bohu. Thus, as a cosmic symbol of sin and rebellion, when the wickedness of man called for exemplary punishment, it was again let loose upon the earth in the deluge. Chaos returned as in the aboriginal deep, Tium, of waste and desolation. In the mystic sense of Scripture, this turbulent element, the great sea, puffed up with proud disdain to swell above the measure of his guise, as threatening to devour all that his power despise, is the restless wicked world into which the apocalyptic dragon is cast down, announcing woe. It is the symbol of worldly pride and tumultuous rebellion, of confusion and anarchy. Thou rulest the pride of the sea. We are now in a position to understand the full mystic significance of the otherwise enigmatical statement with which the book of Revelation closes, that the dark image of sin and disorder, which has marred the earth from its very foundation, will have no place in the renovated world. In the new heaven and the new earth, wherein dwelleth the righteousness, there will be no more sea. Tiamat in all its manifold phases, whether we call it T-Home, the dragon, the serpent, Satan, anarchy, evil, sin, or death, shall be finally cast out of God's universe, and the complete victory of the God of light shall be forever consummated. Thus the cycle of Scripture comes full circle, and is manifestly designed harmony. The psalm note sounded in its opening chapter dies away in the closing scene of the great drama, re-echoed in a higher key. Across the ages of the world's history, deep calleth unto deep, T-Home, or no, T-Home to T-Home. Ere it disappears and sinks forever into the eternal calm. All right. Chapter 8. The watery Hades, Tartaros. Akin to Tiamat, the watery waste in the Babylonian mythology was Ea, the spirit of the deep, who eventually came to be identified with another divinity of similar attributes, Malil, the mighty lord of the ghost world, or Hades. Ea, the encircling ocean stream, the water under the earth, was easily confused with the underworld beyond and beneath, to which it was believed to form the entrance. As Infernus passed over into Infernus, so the world of Ea became the realm of Hades. It was Malil, the ghost lord, who, according to the tablets, caused the waters of the flood to come up upon the earth and destroy mankind, which shows how much he and Ea had in common. Both alike exercise control over the world of waters. Both alike were lords of the monsters of the underworld, whether they be dragons and serpents, as in the one case, or ghosts and demons, as in the other. The ancient Akkadians, like ourselves, associating the ideas of profundity and wisdom, as we have already seen, believe Ea, the god of the primordial deep, to be also the god of wisdom, and spoke of him as Telltale, the very wise. His world of mystery is the world of undiscovered secrets. Now, as Telltale would readily take the form of Tartar by the law which prevails in many languages that L and R are interchangeable, one would be tempted to conjecture, though the connecting links cannot be traced, that the word passed over to the Greeks and became their Tartaros, a name for the infernal region which has never received a satisfactory explanation. However, that may be, it is interesting to note that the Greek hell, Tartaros, had originally much the same nature as Tautal, the wise sea god or deep. There is evidence that in the earliest times it was a watery realm, not fiery. To reach the Babylonian Hades, the waters of the great reservoir of ocean had to be crossed. When Ishtar descended to its portals, the words she addressed to its porter are, "Opener of waters, open thy gate." Indeed, Proclus notes that the ancients generally conceived the ocean as separating the visible world from the kingdom of the dead, or Hades, so that such as went to Hades must first pass the ocean. What is that? It's Nos manet oceanus circumvagus arva betia petamus arva divitis et insulus. Similarly, in the book of Enoch, Hades is seen to be by a great sea which is towards the west, the place whither all the waters of the deep flow, the mouth of the deep. This is the prison of the angels, and here they are held to eternity. Even Scripture so far condescends to the popular idea as to regard the depths of the sea as the realm of the dead. And Tartaros, there is a reason to believe, originally denoted a dark, watery abyss in the heart of the sea. Plutarch implies that it was so called from its coldness, comparing the verb, I don't know what that word is, to shiver from cold, to which Milton seems to refer when he says that the creating spirit in his action on the abyss downward purged the black Tartarus, cold infernal dregs adverse to life. Hesiod in like manner represents Poseidon, the sea god, setting gates to Tartarus to confine the Titans. Hard by its entrance was Hydra, the water serpent. So in the Septuagint version of Job, what is that? Is that 31? 31? I think that is. No. 41? Shoot. I'll put it in there. The sea monster Leviathan is associated with Tartaros. He considers the Tartaros of the abyss his captive. The prophet in the book of Jonah, then swallowed by the sea monster and covered by the deep, seemed to himself as one that had entered into Hades. Out of the belly of Sheol did I cry, for thou didst cast me into the depth in the heart of the seas, and the flood was around me, the waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The deep Tehom was round about me, the weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottom of the mountains, the earth was her bars closed upon me forever. The last words here refer to the barriers which were conceived as separating the earth from Sheol lying beneath the sea. The eschatological figures employed by Jonah rendering this passage particularly appropriate for our Lord's purpose when he wished to speak of his own resurrection from the world of the dead. So shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, where the subterranean abyss of Sheol is denoted by the heart of the earth, as it was by the heart of the sea in Jonah, and the descent into Hades is referred to. Several other passages Passages of the Old Testament point to the same conclusion, that Sheol, the dark abode of the dead, was conceived by the Jews as lying at the bottom of the deep. Thus, Jahveh asks of Job, "Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the recesses of the deep?" Tehom. "Have the gates of death been revealed unto thee, or hast thou seen the gates of the shadow of death?" Still plainer is the remarkable statement that the netherworld of the shades of departed spirits in fury lies at the bottom of the sea. The shades of the dead, Rephaim, tremble beneath the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Sheol is naked before him, and Abaddon hath no covering. The psalmist also places Sheol in the Tehom, or deep. "Thou shalt bring me up again from the depths, Tehom of the earth." Let's see here. St. Paul even holds similar language when he puts the question, "Who shall descend into the abyss?" That is, to bring Christ up from the dead. The meaning of abyss here is determined by the passage in Deuteronomy, which he is citing. "Neither is it the world beyond the sea, that thou shouldest say, Who shall go over the sea for us and bring it unto us?" The other side of the sea is equated with the abyss, and both with the place of the dead. This elucidates the meaning of the fine passage in Psalm 139. 139, wow. "If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, thou art there. If I raise the wings of the dawn and settle down at the extremity of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me." The parallelism shows that the meaning is that even in the region of the dead, which is situated at the furthest verge of the ocean, God would be present with him. The Greeks entertained similar notions with regard to their infernal regions. Homer represents Hades, the king of the shades, as in fear lest earth-shaking sea god Poseidon should break down into his realms. The infernal monarch, heard alarmed and springing from his throne, cried out in fear lest Neptune, breaking through the solid earth to mortals and immortals, should lay bare his dark and drear abode of God's abhorred. In the Odyssey, the shade of his mother addresses Odysseus with the words, "How is it, O my son, that you alive this deadly darksome region underdive, twixt which and earth so many mighty seas and horrid currents interpose with Pre's throng, Oceanus in chief." With these references may be compared the titles of the god of the Babylonian underworld: King of the Water Deep, King of the Death Flood, which encircles the netherworld, King of the Waterhouse in the depth of the ocean. All right, buckle up. It's a long one. Chapter 9. The deep is hell. We have seen how the Babylonian conception of the unreclaimed watery chaos developed into an infernal power, and in one direction as the dragon serpent or evil spirit, and in another direction into an infernal or lower region into which the souls of men descend after death. As Tiamat cherished in her dark depths all monstrous forms of evil, so among the Hebrews the great deep was the abode of Rahab, the storm dragon, which was only another form of Tiamat, and in later times interpreted to be Satan. Thus Job, speaking of the Almighty, says, "He stilleth the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through Rahab. His hand hath pierced the gliding serpent." Here the Septuagint translate the last line, "By his command he hath destroyed the apostate dragon," and Origen, commenting on the passage, says it is certain that by the apostate or fugitive dragon is to be understood the devil himself, who is essentially of a cold nature. In the sea also, he adds, the dragon is said to reign, for the prophet intimates that the serpent and dragon, which certainly is referred to one of the wicked spirits, is also in the sea, alluding probably to Ezekiel 32:2. Thou art as a dragon in the seas. And elsewhere the prophet says, I will draw out my holy sword upon the dragon, the flying serpent, upon the dragon, the crooked serpent, and will slay him. And again he says, even though they hide from my eyes and descend into the depths of the sea, there will I command the serpent, and it shall bite them. In the book of Job, also, he is said to be the king of all things in the waters. The dragon who is in the sea was similarly understood by S. Jerome to be the devil. In medieval Latin, as De Gubernatis notes in his chapter on the serpent and the aquatic monster, Hydros or water serpent was a name of the devil, who was also sometimes identified with Neptunus under the name of Aquatulus, or god of the waters. He adds that a demon called Dracus from Draco was believed to haunt streams, and that generally the serpent devil appears in special connection with the infernal waters. This marine character of the evil one is widely traceable in folklore. There is an Arabic superstition example that the huge hand of Satan may be rising out of the ocean to seize anyone who ventures to sail on the sea of darkness. Mare Tembrosum, the Atlantic. An Irish 8th century life of St. Fechin ascribes the savagery of a swelling, tempestuous sea to Satan himself assisting from beneath. In the Babylonian mythology, the abyss of waters was also the appointed abode of demons and the place of their punishment. There, the 7 evil spirits have their dwelling, who, along with Tiamat, i.e., the storm winds in conjunction with the deep, conspire to tear down the heavens and throw nature into its primitive anarchy. They are frequently mentioned in the tablets. Example, those 7, the evil gods, the serpents of death, who have no fear, those 7, the evil gods, who swoop like the deluge, swoop upon the great world like a storm. In the great mother deep, Bohu, the waste, who was also the lady of the house of death, these demons were assigned their home. Another name by which they were known was Anunnaki, or masters of the underworld, and in this capacity they were the agents of the infernal goddess Alat, the lady of the gloomy pit. In fact, virtually devils. It was these Anunnaki, or lords of the subterranean water, who brought the flood over the earth according to the deluge tablets. Another inscription says, in the abyss of the seas 7 are they, pity and kindness know they not, evil are they, baleful are they. When they issue forth upon the earth, it is in the guise of pestilent and destructive winds, and their representations on the monuments were forms of the most repulsive hideousness, which strongly resemble the devils of the medieval illuminators. If Tiamat is the prototype of Satan himself, the Anunnaki of the deep are certainly the counterparts of the demons. These two were commonly believed to be busy in storms. When Ferdinand, in the tempest, leaped into the sea, he cried, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." The 8th century life of Saint Fechin mentions that he could not behold the sea in a great gale without thinking upon these evil powers and influences whose fury is seen in that watery fury, and their hellish hate and turbulence in the beating of the sea against the rocks, and the gnashing and twisting of their lost and evil souls, and the gnashing and twisting of the froth. In reading this graphic description, we can hardly help thinking of an incident in the tempest on the Sea of Galilee, when the Lord rebuked the sea and the winds as if sentient creatures. We may conjecture, perhaps without irreverence, that he was condescending to the modes of thought of the terrified fishermen when he addressed each raging element in turn with a direct personal word of command. To the roaring wind, be silent. To the yawning deep, close thy mouth. The latter words recall the primitive idea of the sea as a devouring open-mouthed monster, ready to swallow up the little bark which it had been cruelly tormenting. His deep devouring jaws wide gaped like the grisly mouth of hell, through which into his dark abyss all raven fell. The conscious being to whom the rebuke was given as the ultimate and moving cause of the lawless state of the elements, no doubt was Satan, the author of all disorders alike in the natural and spiritual world, which indeed was, as we have seen, the primary conception of that anarch old. In like manner, the walking of Jesus upon the stormy billows was very probably not merely a thaumaturgic act to exhibit his mastery over the tumultuous power of the deep, and so his oneness with him whose way is in the sea, who alone treadeth upon the waves of the sea, but a parabolic action as treading down the rebellious uprising of sin, disorder, and death, and trampling on the watery kingdom, whose ambitious head spits in the face of heaven, on the part of him under whose feet the head of the serpent and all his enemies are to be placed. All right, chapter 10. Punishment of the rebel host. There are distinct traces of a belief among the Babylonians that a certain portion of the host of heaven revolted against the supreme God and were in consequence imprisoned in a gloomy region and abode of desolation in company with the vanquished monsters of Tiamat, primordial chaos, on whose side they had ranged themselves. Just as in the Greek myth, the Titans, who along with Cronus had revolted against Zeus, were confined in Tartaros. The Descent of Ishtar says, "In Hades dwell the princes and nobles, there dwell the monsters of the abyss, there dwelleth Etana," called Titan by Berosus. Similarly, the tablet of the seven evil spirits, at whose head stood Tiamat. In the first days, the evil gods, the angels who were in rebellion, who in the lower part of heaven had created, they caused their evil work, devising with wicked heads. And again, like lightning, they darted, descending into the abyss of waters. The fourth tablet of the creation epic also mentions the punishment of the rebel gods, angels, who assisted Tiamat. They bear their sin, they are kept in bondage, and the 11 monsters are filled with fear. As for the rest of the spirits who marched in her rear, he laid cords on their hands, he fettered and laid the yoke on his foes. Over the gods in bondage, he strengthened his watch. Besides the foregoing should be placed a difficult passage in Isaiah, which seems to bear a similar meaning. The Lord shall punish the host of the height on high, and they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison. And after many days shall they be punished. The obvious import is that judgment will be visited by the Almighty on the army of his angels for some grievous offense, on account of which they are thrust down into the pit as their prison. The book of Enoch carries on the tradition as follows. There I saw a place beyond the great earth. There the waters collected, and I saw a great abyss in the earth, and over that abyss a void place. The angel said, "This is the place of the consummation of heaven and earth. It is a prison for the stars of heaven and for the host of heaven. These are of the stars who have transgressed the command of God the highest, and are bound here till 10,000 worlds. The number of the days of their sins shall have been consummated. This is the prison of the angels, and here they are held to eternity." We have in these passages evidently the germ of the statement in the second epistle of St. Peter. God spared not angels who sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus, and delivered them over the caverns, so the caverns of darkness, reserved unto judgment, the caverns to which they were consigned being perhaps those of the watery abyss of Tartarus, Tihom. The employment of the essentially mythological word, it's a Greek word here, is remarkable, it being used elsewhere for the punishment inflicted by Zeus on Cronus and the rebel Titans. It is interesting to note, moreover, that Cronus was identified by the Greeks with Ea, the water god, and the Titans with the Rephaim, who occupied the subaqueous hell. Subaqueous.
Yeah, subaqueous hell, while the word Titan itself has been deduced from the Assyrian Etenna, the ruler of Hades. The apostate angels of St. Peter appear to be the same as those referred to in Jude 6, who kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation and are reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, just as the Titans were punished by Zeus. By a further and natural extension of the idea, the deep, which confined the evil spirits, was believed to be the place appointed for the punishment of wicked men also. An Akkadian folk saw cautions the evildoer with the words, "If evil thou doest, to the everlasting sea thou shalt surely go." All right, chapter 11 The Abyss. Tehom, the Hebrew word for the chaotic waters in Genesis 1:2, is translated in the Septuagint by the word abyss. A great deep and a good deal of its primeval significance clung to the term in its subsequent use in biblical Greek. The sad black horror of Cimmerian mists, the sable fumes of hell's infernal vault, or if aught darker in the world be taught, muffled the face of that profound abyss full of disorder and fell mutinies. In the New Testament, it is used in a specific sense as meaning either the region of the dead or the abode of evil spirits. Kurtz has noted that there is in Scripture a close mystical connection between the sea and death and Hades. Hagenstenberg has made the same remark. Accordingly, we find in the Apocalypse the sea coordinated with Hades and death as a reciprocal of the dead, which it delivers up at the resurrection. And St. Paul, Paul, as we have seen, uses abyss as a synonym for Sheol, the underworld of departed spirits. In the Gospel of St. Luke, the word is employed specifically for the abode of evil spirits in which they dread to be confined. The legion of demons entreated Jesus that he would not command them, when cast out of the man, to depart into the abyss, and yet when permitted to enter into the swine, they proceeded under some irresistible impulse to rush headlong down into the sea, and so return, no doubt, to their own proper abode beneath the waters. The abyss, in this passage, as the haunt of evil spirits, corresponds, as Olshausen long ago remarked, to the Hebrew Tehom, and we may add to Tehom as inhabited by the demon brood of Tiamat. With curious tenacity, this ancient belief lived on in English folklore down to modern times. Evil spirits, when exorcised by priests or witches according to the approved formula, were banished to the bottom of the Red Sea. Dr. Johnson said that for his part he would rather lay a walking spirit in the tumultuous buller of Bacan than in that time honored reciprocal. The word abyss occurs frequently in the Apocalypse in the same sense as the dwelling place of the devil and his angels, but unfortunately, the authorized version has disguised the fact by rendering it the bottomless pit. The revised version correctly retains the word abyss. In the 9th chapter, for instance, the monstrous locusts have over them as king the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, perdition, and in the Greek he hath the name Apollyon, destroyer. It is out of the abyss also that the various infernal dragons of the vision are seen to arise, all legitimate descendants of the aboriginal chaos dragon, Tiamat. Owing to its use in the Vulgate in these passages, abyssus became a familiar word in medieval Latin for Hades and the infernal region. From frequently reoccurring in mid-high German in the phrases, what is that phrase? An abyss or an obis in abysso. It assumed the spurious form nobis in the sense of orcus, death, or the underworld, with many curious developments such as nobis hos for purgatory, Hans Sachs, and nobis krug, devil's tavern for hell, Luther. The rich man's soul was in noble scrug, Fisher. Returning to the revelation we find in the 12th chapter, the great red dragon having 7 heads, which vividly recalls its counterpart in a very early Babylonian hymn. The huge serpent of 7 heads, the serpent that beats the sea, which attacks the foe in the face, the devastator of forceful battle. The war that follows between this great apocalyptic dragon with his angels and Michael and his angels bears an unmistakable resemblance to the aboriginal conflict between the dragon Tiamat, the leader of the revolting powers of chaos and darkness, on the one side, and Merodach, the god of light and champion of the heavenly powers, on the other. The great overseer, or priest of the spirits of heaven, as he is called on one tablet, and as we find a few verses later that this heaven-defying dragon is expressly declared to be the old serpent that is called the devil and Satan. We are confirmed in that belief that Tiamat is ultimately identical with the Hebrew conception of Satan. It is quite in keeping that the apocalyptic monster, as being originally of oceanic origin, proceeds in his rage to cast a river of water out of his mouth. We may further compare Azidahaka, the 3-headed fiendish snake of the Zendavesta, the mightiest demon created by the evil spirit, Angra Manu, to destroy the world of the good principle, striving to seize and put out the Havareno, the light of sovereignty or glory from above. He is confounded and cast to the ground. It has been remarked that the apocalyptic writers do not invent their symbolism, but adapt it from early traditions. And in particular, that primitive cosmogenic idea were often employed in Christian times in an eschatological connection. Hence, the Babylonian and Persian influences traceable in the Revelation. W. Bassett has pointed out that the Antichrist legend is a later anthropomorphic resetting of the old Babylonian dragon myth. There existed in the popular Jewish belief the foreboding of another revolt of the old Marin monster with whom God had warred W-A-R-R-E-D, at the creation. I think it's Ward. At the creation, who in the last days was again to rise and contend in heaven, storming battle with God. The expectation is not of any hostile ruler, but of a struggle of Satan directly with God, of a conflict of the dragon with the Almighty throned in heaven. To me, says Bassett, the Antichrist legend seems a simple incarnation of that old dragon myth. He shows in support of his contention that Antichrist is frequently represented as a dragon by Ephraim, the Sibyls, and others, or as a mishapen monster. He maintains that Belial, badness, otherwise Beliar, the opponent of Messiah and a wicked angel who rules the ethereal world, is only another manifestation of the same ubiquitous dragon. The significant gloss of Hesychius is, man, that's Greek. I'll put it in there. In the following passage, the word seems to be used for Satan or the abyss of destruction. The cords of death compassed me, and the floods of Belial made me afraid. The cords of Sheol were round about me. The parallelism suggests that 3 infernal powers are mentioned, and Jerome translated it torrents of the devil, Delasich, floods of the abyss. The reference is perhaps to the river of the underworld, conceiving as severing the living from the dead among many peoples. All right, chapter 12, Deserts as the Haunts of Devils. As the desolate waste of waters was believed to harbor evil spirits in its depths, in like manner upon earth, wilderness, and desert places, which seem to be, in the language of the peasantry, God-forgotten spots, survival standing over the primal Tahu Vabohu, wasteness and desolation, were generally supposed to be the natural haunt of demons. In this world, says De Quincey, there are two forms of mighty solitude: the ocean and the desert, the wilderness of barren sands, and the wilderness of the barren waters. Both are the parents of inevitable superstitions, of terrors solemn, ineradicable, eternal. An Akkadian spell put together: the sea, the desert without water. In Assyrian, Bahu, the great mother deep of water of the chaotic abyss, was the home of the seven evil spirits, which seem to have been the destructive winds of the desert. They are described as the seven which unfold themselves in the earth, shaking the walls of the watery abyss. Bohu, the wasteness of the unformed earth, corresponding to this among the Hebrews, is probably due to this association of ideas that desert places, as representing what the whole world once was when ruined by the devil and his angels, came to be regarded by them as a congenial home of all evil things. May the curse depart to the desert is a frequent expression in Babylonian incantations, because in Assyrian belief, as Lenormand has noticed, evil beings had their habitual residence in uncultivated wilds and deserts, from which they wandered into inhabited places to torment mankind. Accordingly, there were special exorcisms with a view to sending them back to those dreary solitudes. Indeed, there was a general belief in Syria, as well as Chaldea and Mesopotamia, that demons inhabited the desert, and there is ample evidence that the Jews inherited the same notion. The scapegoat, loaded with the sins of the people, was sent away into the wilderness, is devoted to Azel, the evil one who dwelt in the desert. Isaiah says that Babylon shall become a ruin and desolation, so that wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and the serum, demonical beings like satyrs, shall dance there. Of Edom, when laid waste, he says, the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the night monster shall settle there. Just as the Apocalypse says of fallen Babylon, it is become a habitation of demons and a hold of every unclean spirit. The devil, it is implied, have a malicious pleasure in all that is waste and desolate upon earth, in ruined paradises and overthrown glory. Where the marks of the curse are most apparent, in barrenness, thorns, and thistles, there they exalt and make their home. In the book of Tobit, Asmodeus, the evil spirit, when exorcised by Raphael, fled into Upper Egypt, the type of a waste and desolate land, as in the Gospel of St. Matthew. The unclean spirit, when expelled from a man in a similar manner, wanders through waterless or desert places, seeking in vain for rest. And finally, as Archbishop Trench remarks, this sense of the wilderness as the haunt of evil spirits would of itself give a certain fitness to that as the place of the Lord's encounter with Satan at the temptation. All right, chapter 13. The Euphrates as a spirit river. There are sundry other traces of Babylonian ideas pervading the symbolism of the apocalypse, which would well repay examination, but we cannot enter into the investigation here at any length. I may just indicate the difficult passage wherefore angels are said to be bound on the great river Euphrates. The commentators, while recognizing in the binding of well-known illusion with regard to evil spirits, have been at a loss to understand why the Euphrates should be the place of their confinement. We obtained some new light, however, when we learned that in Babylonian belief, the Euphrates as being the entrance to the great deep, Tehom, was mystically the point of contact with the spirit world. Not only was it the beginning of the ocean stream, which was supposed to encircle the earth like a monstrous serpent, but it was also identified with Datelia, the river of death, in the underworld. Thus, while it was called the river of the great deep and the river of the snake, viz. Of the encircling ocean, of which it was but a prolongation, it was called also the river of Enina, the mistress of the ghost world, and sometimes the river of the sheepcot of the ghosts, the latter expression apparently meaning the place where spirits were in safekeeping. The Euphrates, conceived as Dactylia, the river of death, was the home of the Anunnaki, or evil spirits, and the entrance to the realm of Hades. In Lucian's Necromantica Menipus and his Chaldean guide embark on the Euphrates in order to reach the land of the dead. Here, perhaps, we have also the origin of the enigmatical Daniel, the legendary submarine cavern at Babylon, which was the abode of evil spirits and enchanters. In the Daniel caverns under the roots of the ocean met the masters of the spell. The apocalyptic vision of the loosing of the destroying angels bound at the river Euphrates belongs, we cannot doubt, to this branch of the great Tiamat cycle. The eschatological reference to the same is seen in the perilous water which in the legends of all countries the soul has to cross after death before it can win its way to its heavenly destination in the west. It is the ocean stream separating this earth from the unknown beyond, beneath which the sun has his abode. The spirit of the waters, as the spirit of evil in the form of a monstrous dog or dragon, tries to seize it and overcome the passing soul, and the ocean stream, Tiamat, in which some are engulfed in the passage, becomes the abyss of hell. For the righteous, however, a safe means of transit is provided. In the words of a curious death chant used by the Badagas, a tribe in the Nelgahari Hills, the chamber dark of death shall open to his soul. The sea shall rise and waves surround on every side, but yet that awful bridge, no thicker than a thread, shall stand both firm and strong. The dragon's yawning mouth is shut, it brings no fear. The chief points which have come into prominence in the foregoing pages may be summed up as follows. 1. Mosaic record of the creation is based on the more ancient accounts which have been preserved in the Babylonian tablets. In the words of Bishop Harold Brown, Moses probably had before him the ancient primeval record of the formation of the world, and certain documents or traditions referring to the patriarchal ages which he incorporated into his history. Or, as Renan puts it, Genesis 1 embodies the Chaldean cosmogony as simplified by Semitic genius and contains good Babylonian science for the time when it was written. There was a primitive religion of the whole Semitic race in which El, the strong one in heaven, was invoked by the ancestors of all the Semitic races before there were Babylonians in Babylon, Phoenicians in Sidon, and Tyrus before there were Jews in Mesopotamia and Jerusalem. This was the ancient common possession, says Professor Max Dunker, of the Eastern Semitic tribes from whom the Hebrews were sprung. But with that clearness and vigor, the Hebrews have succeeded in purifying and exalting the rude fancies of the nations so closely akin to them. The serious and thoughtful effort to deepen the traditions of the past into an ethical significance, to sublimate legends into simple moral teaching and transplant the myth into the region of moral earnestness and moral purpose, to pass beyond the rude naturalism of their kinsmen into the supernatural, from the varied polytheism of Babel and Canaan to the monotheism. This it is which gives to the Hebrews the first place, and not among Semitic nations only, in the sphere of religious feeling and development. The overruling and directing power which caused this spiritual development was inspiration. 2. The religious conceptions of the Babylonians, which lay at the base of the Hebrews' early faith in finding presentation and expression, seem to have their motive or suggestion in some of the phenomenal aspects of nature, more especially in that glorious sun drama which was evoked the religious enthusiasm of most primitive peoples. Thus, the primary idea of the operation of the divine creator was suggested by the sun, the most potent and resplendent object in the natural world, which is the generator and source of all physical life and the apparent cause of all things that exist. Jehovah himself cannot be addressed by his worshiper in fitter language than this: the Lord God is a sun, nor his Messiah find a loftier title than the Son of Righteousness. All spiritual conceptions, as is well known, are founded on the material basis of this nature. And as the sun is the most striking object in the firmament, the one source, as it seems to the simple primitive mind, of light and warmth, pure, exalted, potent, we need not wonder that not only Moloch worshippers, but seekers after God in all lands and in all states of education have taken it as the image of the great and holy being, after whom they seek and develop the religious vocabulary by ringing the changes on the phrases that denote its unique qualities. 3. As the Babylonian sun god Merodach, the Lord of Light, was held to be the creator of the earth, so, on the other hand, the dark, turbid waters of the sea, out of which the sun was seen to rise, as if triumphant over a power that had held undisputed sway, became a vivid image of that primeval chaos from which the world was called forth when the omnipotent subjugated it to law and order. Accordingly, the great deep was constituted a symbol of anarchy and lawlessness. 4. This tumultuous water, the envelope of the earth mass, was personified as a dragon or serpentine monster, Tiamat, and from being the representative of physical evil became ultimately significant of moral evil. 5. Among the Hebrews, this serpent or dragon is the being that introduces sin among the newly created race and draws man into disobedience, i.e., to range himself on the side of the disorder and confusion of which the dragon serpent in the cosmic sphere was the animated symbol, of which the lawless one, Antichrist, is to be the final development. 6. This chaos dragon may be traced as an archaic survival and semi-mythological abstraction in several books of the Old Testament. It further contributed shape and coloring to later conceptions of Satan or the devil, who even down to medieval times was believed to have some undefined connection with the great deep and was often called the dragon. 7. The sea, as a visible remnant of the once universal waters of chaos upon which the Creator had put forth his coercive powers, was held to be a rebellious element, hostile to law and order, and in league with the spirit of evil. As such, it is eventually to be destroyed and have no place in the renovated earth. 8. The deep or abyss, as evil in itself and the unexplored home of mystery, was supposed to be the abode of evil spirits and was identified with Hades, Tartaros, or hell. 9. Deserts and wilderness as the counterparts on land of the watery chaos and typical survivals of the waste and desolation of the yet unformed earth were similarly supposed to be the chosen haunt of evil spirits. The ruling idea which runs through all these weird and sometimes grotesque conceptions is evidently evidently that which Dr. Martineau has excellently developed in a thoughtful discourse on the realm of order. In the production and preservation of order, all men recognize something that is sacred. We have an intuitive conviction that it is not at bottom the earliest condition of things, that whatever is rose out of some dead groundwork of confusion and nothingness and incessantly gravitates thitherwards again, and that without a positive energy of God, no universe could have emerged from the void or be suspended out of it for an hour. There is no task more indubitably divine than the creation of beauty out of chaos, the imposition of law upon lawless, and the setting forth of times and seasons from the stagnant and eternal night. And so the Bible opens with a work of arrangement and closes with one of restoration, looks around the ancient firmament at first and sees that all is good, and surveys the new heavens at last to make sure that evil is no more. The spoiling of his works, the wild wandering from his will, he will bear no more. The disorder that has gathered together shall be rectified. He will again divide the darkness from the light and confusion and wrong. All that hurts and destroys shall be thrust into unknown depths, while wisdom and holiness shall be as the brightness of the firmament and as the stars forever and ever. one of the Anunnaki or demons of the abyss, page 59, in attendance on Alat, the goddess of the infernal region, represented as brandishing two serpents and traversing Dattila, the river of death, page 77, from an Assyrian monument. And that's the end of this book. There is a large appendix, which I am not going to read, so you should buy this book. All right. Babylonian influence on the Bible and popular beliefs. Shorty. A. Smythe Palmer. Thanks. How do I shut this off? There it goes.